What you're about to witness will challenge every stereotype about national pride, military discipline, and the unexpected connections that can form between former adversaries. This is the story of how a Russian visitor's test of British resolve became a master class in mutual respect across historical divides. Dmitry Volkov had not come to London as a tourist. The 62-year-old former Spetsnaz officer arrived in Britain carrying 40 years of Cold War conditioning, a lifetime of training that had taught him to view the West as adversary, British military tradition as imperial arrogance, and Western ceremonial display as weakness masquerading as strength. But his granddaughter Katya, studying at Oxford, had insisted on this visit to Buckingham Palace during his week-long stay. Dedushka, she had said in the mixture of Russian and English that marked her generation, "You served your country with honor for 30 years. These guards serve theirs the same way. Maybe you have more in common than you think." Dmitry had agreed reluctantly, more to spend time with Katya than from any interest in British military pageantry. In his experience, ceremonial soldiers were parade ground warriors, impressive in their uniforms but untested by real combat. The Soviet military tradition had taught him to value substance over spectacle, proven capability over polished brass. The Royal Guards standing at attention before them represented everything Dmitry had been trained to dismiss: ceremonial perfection without battlefield experience, traditional display without modern relevance, imperial nostalgia without contemporary purpose. The scarlet uniform seemed designed more for tourist photographs than tactical effectiveness. The bare skin had appeared impractical for any real military function. But Guard Lance Corporal Jonathan Mitchell was something Dmitry hadn't expected to encounter. A veteran of 3 tours in Afghanistan, a combat soldier who had earned his ceremonial posting through years of proven service under fire. The same mountains where Soviet forces had fought and died in the 1980s had tested Mitchell's courage and competence in the 2010s, creating a connection across ideological and temporal divides that neither man yet realized they shared. Dmitry approached Mitchell's post with the calculating assessment that had defined his military career. In Spetsnaz training, he had learned to evaluate opponents quickly, identifying weaknesses that could be exploited, strengths that needed to be respected. His eyes moved over Mitchell's bearing with professional interest, cataloging details that casual observers would miss. The guard's posture was flawless, but Dmitry noticed something else: the micro-adjustments that indicated active muscle engagement rather than passive positioning. The breathing pattern suggested cardiovascular conditioning consistent with serious physical training. The eye movements, nearly imperceptible beneath the ceremonial stillness, revealed tactical awareness that Dmitry recognized from his own years of standing watch in hostile territory. "Impressive display," Dmitry said in heavily accented English, his voice carrying the particular tone that military professionals used when testing each other's resolve. "Very colorful, very traditional, but I wonder if there is substance beneath the ceremony." The words were delivered as challenge rather than insult, the kind of probing question that soldiers used to measure each other's mettle. Dmitry wasn't seeking to humiliate or mock. He was conducting reconnaissance, trying to determine if this ceremonial warrior possessed the inner steel that real military service demanded. Mitchell's response came in the form of perfect stillness that somehow managed to convey acknowledgement without compromise. His eyes remained fixed on their regulation point, but something in his bearing shifted almost imperceptibly. What had been routine ceremonial duty became active engagement with a fellow professional, recognition that he was being evaluated by someone qualified to judge military bearing. Katya watched her grandfather with growing understanding. She had heard stories about his service, about the elite training that had shaped his worldview, about the pride he took in military excellence that transcended political ideology. But she had never seen him in full assessment mode, applying decades of professional expertise to evaluate a potential adversary or ally. In Soviet Union, Dmitry continued, stepping closer, remaining within respectful boundaries. We had saying, "Pretty uniform does not make pretty soldier." We believed that real strength comes from tested discipline, not parade ground polish. The comparison hung in the morning air like smoke from old battlefields. Around them, tourists continued their sightseeing, largely unaware that they were witnessing a conversation between warriors from different armies, different wars, different philosophies of service, but sharing the common language of military professionalism. Mitchell absorbed the implicit challenge with the same steadiness he brought to all aspects of his duty. But Dmitri noticed something that impressed him despite his skepticism. The guard's stillness wasn't rigid or artificial. It was the controlled relaxation of someone comfortable with extended periods of alert waiting, the kind of patience that could only be developed through real operational experience. British Army teaches us that discipline is not performance, Mitchell said quietly, his voice pitched low enough that only Dmitri could hear. It is commitment to duty regardless of audience. Whether tourists are watching or Taliban are shooting, the reference to Taliban hit Dmitri with unexpected force. This ceremonial soldier had faced the same enemy that had tested Soviet forces in Afghanistan. The mountains where Dmitri's comrades had died fighting Mujahideen in the 1980s had become the proving ground where Mitchell had earned his right to wear the uniform that Dmitri was now evaluating. For the first time since approaching the guard post, Dmitri felt genuine interest rather than professional skepticism. This wasn't ceremonial pageantry performed by parade ground soldiers. This was a combat veteran maintaining standards learned through years of service in conditions that would have been familiar to any Spetsnaz operator. Afghanistan. Dmitri asked, the single word carrying the weight of shared understanding between soldiers who had served in the same hostile terrain, even if separated by decades and opposing sides. 3 tour, Mitchell confirmed, still maintaining his ceremonial bearing, but allowing enough humanity into his voice to acknowledge the professional recognition that was forming between them. Helmand Province, 2012 to 2015. Same mountains your people knew well. The admission created a bridge across 40 years of ideological opposition. Both men had been tested by the same unforgiving landscape, the same brutal conditions, the same life or death situations that revealed character more accurately than any training exercise or evaluation process. Dmitri found himself looking at Mitchell with new eyes. The ceremonial uniform was still impressive rather than practical, the bearskin hat still more symbolic than tactical, the entire display still designed more for tourist entertainment than battlefield effectiveness. But the man wearing those symbols had proven himself in circumstances that Dmitri respected above all others. Actual combat against a determined enemy in terrain that destroyed weak soldiers and forged strong ones. You served with honor, Dmitri said, the words carrying the particular weight that one combat veteran gives to another across all boundaries of nationality or ideology. Mountains are honest judge of soldiers. They accept no pretense. Mitchell's response was subtle but profound. While maintaining his perfect ceremonial stillness, he allowed the slightest relaxation in his breathing, the microscopic softening that indicated recognition of respect offered and returned. It was a sign that only another military professional would notice, but it conveyed volumes about the mutual understanding that was developing between them. The conversation continued for several more minutes, conducted in the careful language that soldiers used when recognizing each other as professionals regardless of the uniforms they wore or the flags they served. They discussed the challenges of mountain warfare, the particular skills required for extended operations in hostile territory, the bonds formed between soldiers who had faced death together in service to their countries. What had begun as Dmitri's test of British military discipline had evolved into something neither man had expected. Mutual recognition between combat veterans who discovered that their shared experience of service transcended the political divisions that had once made them enemies. Katya watched this transformation with amazement and pride, seeing her grandfather engage with genuine respect rather than Cold War suspicion, witnessing the moment when professional soldiers recognized each other across the barriers of history and nationality. The test had become something far more valuable, proof that military honor was universal language spoken fluently by anyone who had earned the right to call themselves a warrior. The recognition that passed between the two veterans created a shift in the atmosphere around Mitchell's post. Katya noticed at first the way other tourists began to sense that something significant was happening, something that transcended the usual entertainment value of watching ceremonial guards deal with difficult visitors. Dmitri stepped back slightly, not in retreat but in the formal acknowledgement that one professional soldier gives to another when mutual respect has been established. His entire bearing changed from interrogation to collaboration, from testing to understanding. In Spetsnaz, Dmitri said, his voice carrying the particular warmth that Russian men reserved for sharing military stories with worthy listeners, we learned that enemy who fights well deserves respect more than ally who fights poorly. You British, you fought well in those mountains. The admission cost Dmitri something. 40 years of ideological conditioning had taught him to view Western military forces as technically superior, but morally inferior, well-equipped, but lacking the spiritual strength that came from defending one's homeland. But Mitchell's proven service in Afghanistan had earned him entry into the brotherhood that transcended national boundaries. Combat veterans who had been tested by the same unforgiving standards. Mitchell's response came in the form of a slight nod, barely perceptible but clearly visible to someone trained in military observation. It was acknowledgement of respect offered and returned, recognition that they shared membership in a fraternity that had nothing to do with politics and everything to do with proven courage under fire. Soviet forces in Afghanistan, Mitchell said quietly, our instructors studied your tactics, learned from your experience. Mountain warfare doesn't change much. Same challenges, same solutions, same price for mistakes. The conversation was drawing attention from other tourists, but not in the usual way. Instead of phones being raised to record confrontation or entertainment, people were stepping closer to listen, sensing that they were overhearing something rare. Genuine communication between former adversaries who had discovered common ground in shared professional experience. An elderly British man approached the group, his own military bearing evident despite his civilian clothes. "Excuse me," he said politely, "but did I hear correctly? Are you Soviet Spetsnaz?" Dmitri turned to face the newcomer, his assessment automatic and immediate. The man's posture, his way of moving, his direct eye contact, all indicators of military background. Former Spetsnaz, yes. And you are military also, I think. Royal Marines, retired. The man replied with a slight smile. 40 years ago, we were training to fight each other. Today, my son serves alongside Russian forces in peacekeeping operations. Funny how the world changes. The circle was expanding, drawing in other veterans who recognized each other through subtle signs that civilians missed. A woman approached, her confidence stride marking her as former military even before she spoke. Royal Air Force, she introduced herself. Flew support missions for ground forces in Afghanistan. Always respected the Russian pilots who flew those same routes in the 80s. What had begun as Dmitri's individual assessment of British military discipline was evolving into something unprecedented. An impromptu gathering of veterans from different armies, different wars, different decades, but united by the common experience of service and sacrifice. Mitchell remained at his post, maintaining his ceremonial duties while becoming the center of a conversation that bridged decades of ideological division. His presence seemed to anchor the discussion, providing a focal point for professional soldiers to recognize each other across the barriers of nationality and historical opposition. "You know what I notice?" Dmitri said, addressing the growing group, but keeping his eyes on Mitchell. "This guard, he stands not just for ceremony. He stands like soldier who knows what standing watch really means. Like man who has done it when bullets were flying." The observation drew nods of agreement from the other veterans. They could all see what Dmitri was seeing, the difference between ceremonial performance and authentic military bearing, the subtle signs that marked someone who had learned discipline under fire rather than just on parade grounds. Katya found herself documenting the moment with her phone, but not for social media entertainment. She was capturing something historic, the organic formation of understanding between people who had been trained to be enemies but who recognized each other as brothers in arms. In Russian military, Dmitry continued, we have expression, soldier is soldier, regardless of uniform. Today I understand this truth more clearly. Mitchell's shift commander approached, initially concerned about the growing crowd around the guard post. But as he assessed the situation, he recognized what was happening. This wasn't disruption or entertainment. This was something the British military had learned to value, the organic diplomacy that occurred when professional soldiers recognized each other across national boundaries. Sir, the commander addressed Dmitry with the courtesy that military protocol demanded when dealing with foreign veterans. Would you be interested in a brief tour of the Guard facilities? Unofficially, of course, professional courtesy between allied forces, the invitation surprised everyone, including Mitchell. Guard tour were highly restricted, available only to dignitaries and official visitors. But the commander was applying the kind of discretionary judgment that marked good leadership, recognizing that some situations transcended normal protocol. Dmitry's acceptance was immediate. I would be honored. And perhaps your guard here could be relieved for a few minutes. I would like to speak with him properly, soldier to soldier. The arrangement was made with the efficiency that marked professional military operations. Mitchell was temporarily relieved of his post, allowing him to join the conversation as an individual rather than a ceremonial figure. The transformation was remarkable. Freed from the constraints of his formal duty, he became simply a soldier sharing experiences with other soldiers. The tour that followed was unlike any in Buckingham Palace history. Led by veterans from multiple armies, it became a walking seminar on military service, professional standards, and the evolution of warfare from Cold War confrontation to contemporary cooperation. Dmitry asked detailed questions about training standards, equipment maintenance, the balance between ceremonial duties and operational readiness. Mitchell responded with the openness that soldiers showed when speaking to recognized professionals, sharing insights about the intersection of tradition and modernity in British military service. You know what impresses me most? Dmitry said as they examined the Guard facilities, not the uniforms or the ceremony. Is the fact that you put combat veterans in these positions? Shows understanding that ceremony without substance is just theater. The comment captured something essential about what Dmitry had discovered during his visit. His initial skepticism about British military discipline had been replaced by genuine respect for an institution that honored both tradition and proven capability that maintained ceremonial standards while ensuring those standards were upheld by soldiers who had earned the right to represent their service through actual combat experience. As the tour concluded, Dmitry found himself facing Mitchell for a final exchange. The formal evaluation that had begun their interaction had evolved into something approaching friendship, the kind of professional bond that formed quickly between soldiers who recognized each other as legitimate warriors. I came here to test British discipline, Dmitry admitted with characteristic Russian directness. I leave understanding that some things are universal. Courage, honor, commitment to duty. These are not national characteristics. These are soldier characteristics. Mitchell's response carried the weight of mutual understanding that had developed between them. And I learned that respect has no nationality. That the mountains that tested your service are the same ones that tested mine. That we have more in common as soldiers than we have differences as citizens of different countries. The handshake they exchanged was captured by several cameras, but more importantly, it was witnessed by the group of veterans who had gathered around them. In that moment, 40 years of Cold War division seemed less important than the immediate recognition of shared values and common experience. The encounter would be remembered by everyone present as evidence that professional soldiers could find common ground even across the deepest historical divides. That military honor was indeed a universal language that transcended the political boundaries that separated their nations. Dimitri's test of British discipline had become something far more valuable. Proof that former enemies could become allies when they recognized each other as professionals committed to the same fundamental principles of service, sacrifice, and dedication to something larger than themselves. The story of Dimitri's encounter with the Royal Guard would not end with their handshake that November morning. Instead, it would become the beginning of something unprecedented, a cultural exchange program between Russian and British military veterans that would bridge decades of Cold War animosity through shared recognition of military professionalism. 3 months after his return to Moscow, Dmitri received an unexpected package bearing British military postal markings. Inside was a formal invitation from the Ministry of Defense to participate in a veteran exchange program, along with a personal letter from Mitchell explaining how their conversation had inspired a broader initiative to connect former adversaries through their common bond of military service. Your visit reminded us that soldiers understand each other in ways that politicians never will, Mitchell had written. We would like to explore whether that understanding could contribute to better relations between our countries, one veteran at a time. The program that emerged from their encounter would bring together former Spetsnaz operators and British Special Forces, Soviet-era officers, and Royal Guard veterans, creating opportunities for professional dialogue that transcended the political tensions that still complicated official diplomatic relations. Dimitri's first return visit to London 6 months later was markedly different from his tourist experience. He came as an official participant in the veteran exchange, accompanied by 3 other former Spetsnaz officers who had served in Afghanistan during the same period that British forces were learning the lessons that would guide their own deployments decades later. The group was hosted not just at Buckingham Palace, but at military installations across Britain, meeting with veterans from multiple conflicts who shared their experiences of service, sacrifice, and the transition from military to civilian life. The conversations revealed striking similarities in how professional soldiers approached duty regardless of the flags they served or the ideologies they defended. But it was Dimitri's reunion with Mitchell that captured the imagination of military personnel on both sides. The two men had maintained correspondence, sharing stories about their post-service lives, their families, their reflections on the wars they had fought, and the peace they now enjoyed. Their friendship had become symbolic of something larger, the possibility that former enemies could become allies when they recognized each other as fellow servants of principles larger than political ideology. Mitchell had been promoted to color sergeant, and his new responsibilities included training junior guards in both ceremonial duties and the broader meaning of military service. Dimitri's visits became part of that training, offering young soldiers the perspective of someone who had served on the other side of ideological conflicts, but who shared their commitment to duty, honor, and protection of their respective peoples. When I was a young soldier, Dmitri told one group of new recruits during his 3rd visit, I thought enemy was anyone who wore different uniform, served different flag. But mountains of Afghanistan taught me that enemy is not soldier who serves with honor. Enemy is chaos, cowardice, abandonment of duty. These things have no nationality. The recruits listened with the intensity that young soldiers brought to lessons from proven veterans. Here was someone who had fought against British forces in proxy conflicts around the world, but who spoke about military service with the same reverence they were learning to bring to their own duties. Mitchell's parallel presentations to Russian military academies had similar impact. British officers visiting Moscow found audiences hungry for insights about how former adversaries had learned to work together, how professional soldiers could maintain their national loyalties while recognizing universal principles of military honor. The exchange program expanded beyond individual visits to include joint training exercises, professional development seminars, and collaborative research projects on topics ranging from veteran mental health to the evolution of military ethics in modern warfare. Former enemies became colleagues, then collaborators, then friends united by their shared understanding of what it meant to serve something larger than themselves. But perhaps the most significant outcome of Dmitri's initial encounter with Mitchell was the inspiration it provided for similar programs around the world. Military veterans from other former adversary nations began reaching out, seeking to establish their own exchanges based on the British-Russian model. American and Vietnamese veterans found common ground in their shared experience of jungle warfare. Israeli and Palestinian former soldiers discovered mutual respect through their understanding of the price of security in contested territories. Indian and Pakistani officers explored cooperation possibilities despite ongoing political tensions between their nations. Each program followed the template established by Dmitri and Mitchell. Recognition that professional soldiers shared more with each other than they did with civilians from their own countries, that military honor transcended political boundaries, that former enemies could become friends when they acknowledged each other as legitimate warriors. 5 years after their first meeting, Dmitri and Mitchell co-authored a book that became required reading in military academies across Europe, From Adversaries to Allies: How Military Honor Transcends National Boundaries. The book documented not just their personal journey from suspicion to friendship, but the broader transformation that occurred when professional soldiers recognized each other across ideological divides. The most dangerous enemy, they wrote in their conclusion, is not the soldier who serves a different flag, but the civilian who has never served anything larger than personal interest. The greatest ally is not necessarily the one who shares your nationality, but the one who shares your commitment to duty, honor, and sacrifice for the common good. Their friendship became legendary within military circles, cited as evidence that professional bonds could survive political tensions, that individual relationships could build bridges that diplomatic protocols struggled to construct. Young officers on both sides learned their story as an example of how military professionalism could contribute to international understanding. The Royal Guard ceremony at Buckingham Palace continued unchanged, maintaining its ancient traditions and tourist appeal. But guards who served that post after Mitchell carried with them the knowledge that their duty extended beyond protection of symbols and ceremonies to include demonstration that military honor was indeed a universal language. Dmitri returned to Moscow as a changed man, not in his fundamental beliefs about Russian military tradition or national pride, but in his understanding of how those values connected him to professional soldiers everywhere. He became an advocate for international military cooperation, a voice within Russian veteran organizations for engagement with former adversaries based on mutual respect rather than continued hostility. The test that had brought him to London had revealed something he hadn't expected to find. That British military discipline was built on the same foundation as Russian military honor. That ceremonial duties could be performed by proven warriors, that former enemies could recognize each other as brothers in arms when they moved beyond political ideology to focus on the values that made military service meaningful. Their story would be told for generations in both countries, not as evidence that national differences didn't matter, but as proof that some things mattered more than national differences. That courage was courage regardless of the uniform that contained it. That honor was honor regardless of the flag that inspired it. That service was service regardless of the cause that motivated it. In the end, Dmitri's test of British discipline had become something far more valuable. A demonstration that the best soldiers from any army could recognize and respect the best soldiers from any other army, creating possibilities for cooperation that politicians and diplomats often struggled to achieve. The handshake between a former Spetsnaz officer and a Royal Guard had become a symbol of hope that former enemies could indeed become allies when they remembered that they were all soldiers first, servants of their nations second, and human beings above all. The discipline Dmitri had come to test had proven itself not through rigid adherence to protocol, but through the flexibility to recognize a fellow warrior and the wisdom to turn potential confrontation into mutual understanding. It was the highest form of military excellence, strength that included rather than excluded, discipline that united rather than divided. Service that honored not just one's own tradition, but the tradition of service itself, wherever it was found and however it was expressed.